I just had a question, and that is I saw the governor strongly in favor of a spending cap. Senator Scalos mentioned that. I didn't hear a position by Senator Smith, and I was wondering if Senator Smith could tell us whether he would support a state spending cap of 4% or 120% of the consumer price index, whichever was lesser. Would you support that,
No,
Senator?
Can I get a
clarification for you?
Sure.
You mentioned a 4% spending cap, a state spending cap.
4% on spending of state
State
spending cap.
funds.
No, not state funds.
All funds.
All funds.
So if the federal government decides to reimburse us more for something that we do, we should say, thank you, but no thank you?
No. There's all, number one, if the federal government was going to continue a stimulus plan forever, which obviously they won't, that would be a concern. However, if the federal government provided more funds, we could put them in a lockbox or in a proposal that would have a emergency fund for later dates. If
That was a prohibition in the federal stimulus fund that you couldn't say.
If the federal stimulus fund continued to provide funds year after year, there is a provision in the spending cap that under an emergency situation or under an unusual situation, the comptroller could come in and use those funds if necessary. And that's a stopgap measure in case there's an unusual situation. But if we think, I don't think you do, Speaker Silver, I don't believe you believe that the federal government is going to have a stimulus of money year after year after year. And the problem that we had this year is that there was stimulus money that we could have used rather than additional spending on the state side. And we didn't do that. We continued raising the state spending, which was what helps cause this problem. So, Governor, it's not only our predecessors, but it's also this current budget year that caused these types of problems as well.
But
So
our increase in state funding was 0.79%, well below 4% in state dollars. That's the point I don't understand.
Well, let me help you to understand it then. Yeah. If we had a 4% spending cap over the last 10 years, there would have been $68 billion more in revenues. We would have had a surplus this year rather than having the governor have to find ways to cut a huge deficit. So, you can always find the year of the aberration. And
so this year was the year of the aberration.
No. I mean, as far as additional funding, I'm talking about an aberration where you get billions of dollars from the federal government. Sheldon, Speaker Silver, I would just ask you this. Weren't there funds from the stimulus that could have been used for any purpose that the state chose to?
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely, and it was.
And but there were regulations on how the money was driven. Senator DeFrancisco, it had to be driven through the appropriations, and violations of that would make us eligible for the federal government de-obligating the funds as it has in other states. So we didn't want to play any games with the money. We wanted to make it transparent. So we put it right into the listed spending. But it was additional money from the federal government, which at any other time wouldn't be listed in the budget process at all. And the mistake that we made is that we should have really let the public know that 2 or 3 weeks in advance so there'd be no confusion. Speaker Silver is exactly right. The operating spending, the usual spending that we incur was up just 0.79%.
Maybe I can just do a follow-up question with that. Were any items that were other than education that were normally paid for out of the general fund now paid for by stimulus money? And I think there's one example. There's a wonderful program, it's a infertility program that the state has of a little over $4 million. I believe that was now paid for by stimulus money rather than the general fund. So it's a question is where you offloaded some of the state programs into stimulus, and you say, well, our general fund spending was only at 0.7%.
Sure. You know what, you may be right, Senator Skills. Let me check the infertility program.
Well, the point...
Infertility.
Infertility, okay.
The point of the matter is there's a reason that the governor is in support of a constitutional cap or a spending cap. And that is history, not just 1 year or possibly 2 years where the federal government is going to provide us with unlimited amount of monies in order to take care of every problem that might exist. So the history is there that shows that if there was a spending cap, $68 billion would have been more revenue because we wouldn't have spent it. And-
Let me be clear, Senator DeFrancisco, I completely agree with that. And even in terms of the constitutional amendment, I just think constitutional amendment is going to take us 2 or 3 years, and right now we're in the critical years of a recession. I have no problem with the constitutional amendment. I would just hope we would pass something now, because frankly, what you're saying, if we were able to maintain the same discipline this year, in the next 2 or 3 years consecutively, if we could do that. See, my fear is that we're looking at a budget deficit right now for next year is about $2.5 billion. Well, that's our usual budget deficit. Actually, it's lower. I just don't want us to start thinking that the party's over. We're in a deep recession in this country. People out of work, people lost their homes. In the end, I think you're exactly right, that we need a spending cap. We've got to sort of throttle ourselves in advance so we don't get carried away into whatever is the kind of malaise that comes over us when we start really wanting to believe that the money will be there and it's not.
Well, and that's precisely the point, and whether I think both can be passed, a statutory and a constitutional spending cap, so that we do have this protection. But what I'm trying to find out, because we hear everybody say their priorities here, I'm just finding out whether the Speaker of the Assembly and the Senate Majority Leader will support a spending cap that we in the Senate minority support and that the Governor strongly supports, along the lines of the one that I outlined.
Well, I supported a budget this year that was well below the spending cap that you talk about. We increased spending by 0.79% because the revenues weren't there. So, putting an artificially high cap of 4% in a year when we don't have the money doesn't really accomplish anything.
So your answer is no, then?
My answer is, the governor's cap that he proposes is apparently different than your cap, because I think the governor's cap we would be well under the governor's cap at 0.79%.
Okay, so you're against it. Senator Smith, would you be in favor of a constitutional and a statutory spending cap?
Well, one, I voted for the cap last year when you guys were in the majority, so you don't have to ask that rhetorical question. Secondly,
So will you put it on the agenda this year?
second-
Will you put it on
secondly-
the agenda this year?
secondly, as the speakers rightfully said, if in fact we follow your logic, we actually would have been challenged this year, because at a 0.79 spending that we brought this budget in at, according to you, we still had another 0.1% to go, which we wouldn't have had that money. The second thing, I think the speaker said it, the governor said it.
You didn't have to spend it.
First of all, the speaker said this, and I think the governor said it as well. In this budget, you had stimulus money. I guess my question back to you is, if in fact we were faced with the challenge of stimulus money, and in fact if we didn't spend it, it would be returned, where I believe every reporter and every of the 19 million people in the state probably would have objected, what would have been your suggestion at that moment?
My suggestion, first of all, is I'd like an answer to the question. If you supported it last year, would you put it on the agenda this year so we can vote on it?
I answered your question.
Okay.
Thank you.
We'll let everybody else figure out whether you did or not. But what would you do? I said that these are unusual years. You're not required to spend anything. You're required to try to keep the budget low, and you didn't. And you could have used the stimulus money for regular state budget. You just offloaded that money to pay for other state programs and not allow the state money to pay for it. So,
Senator DeFrancisco, would you answer a question?
I'll try my best.
Could the stimulus money been used to eliminate many of the taxes and fees that were part of the budget?
I could even answer that, yes. But I guess the point is, this is the problem. We can have a song and dance out here. The governor would come out strong for a very logical, precise, specific proposal, a spending cap. And we've got a Senate Majority Leader who voted for it last year, and we can't get an answer as to whether he'll put it on the calendar. So this is the most important, and I'll stop now, this is the most important proposal that we have. We got strong support from the governor, and we should really do it if we listen at all to the comptroller, who indicate very carefully that this was a horrible budget this year. We overspent, and I don't think he means overspending the stimulus money. Thank you.